Happy Friday, everyone! It's time for another episode of Friday Sews. Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. I'm Ruth and this is my channel Sew Dysfunctional. So I'm back this week with another Friday Sews, and I have to be honest, right from the start, I haven't actually sewn a thing this week. It's the last day of homeschooling in the UK. The kids are back on Monday. Well, I've got a little one at nursery, so he's been going there anyway, but my elder one is back at school on Monday, so I'm really hoping that I will have some time to settle down and do some sewing from next week. But I thought I would pop on and do a little video because I do actually have a couple of interesting things to share with you from this week. Well, I think they're interesting. Hopefully you will too. First of all, I bought some fabric this week from Sew Over It, actually remnants. Is anybody else a little bit obsessed by remnants? I don't know why. Is it just the fact that there's a little bit of money off? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I got a voucher at Christmas time for Sew Over It from my husband, and I still had some money left on it, having bought some patterns earlier in the year. And I just hopped on their website and they had a few remnants that I really liked the look of. So I thought I would buy a couple and I thought I would show you what I got. So I actually got two pieces of this viscose. One is just under 1 metre and the other one is just under 1/2 metre, I think. So I've got about 1.5 metres, but obviously not in a continuous length. I'm not normally a massive kind of flowery person, but I just thought that it was so pretty. I love the colours, the corally red and the sort of turquoisey teal greens in that. And I just thought it was so pretty. It's nice and drapey as you'd expect from a viscose, but I think it probably is actually opaque, so I won't need to line it with anything. Last August I did a review of the Peppermint Magazine Peplum top. And I'm going to fiddle around with that pattern a little bit, but I'm hoping to make a couple of those for this summer because it's actually a really nice sort of light and breezy top. And just over 1 metre or so of this kind of fabric is perfect for that. So I'm probably going to turn that into one of those. Then I bought this piece of cotton. Now this is, I guess, technically a quilting cotton, which I wouldn't normally buy. But when I saw this on the website as an actual fabric that you could buy by the metre, I really, really liked it. And for some reason, I didn't buy any at the time. And then next time I looked at it, gone. But they had this remnant that it's about 1.3 metres, I think. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with it. But I was thinking of using it to make some summer shorts for me, because I'm definitely going to need some new ones this summer. It's quite wide, so there should be enough to make some shorts for me, but if for any reason, whatever the pattern I choose is, there isn't enough, it will definitely make something nice for my daughter, a pair of shorts or a play suit or something. There's loads enough for that. And it's kind of not too stiff that it'll be really kind of bulky and boxy, I think. So that's that. And then lastly, I bought this piece of viscose jersey, which again I think is about 1 metre. Now it's one of those things, it's one of the pitfalls of buying fabric online. It's quite see-through. I was planning to just make a kind of a boxy t-shirt with it for the summer. But with it being as sort of thin as it is, it might not be quite what I want. This is just one of those things from buying fabric online. It's just impossible to tell what you're going to get. I'm so looking forward to when the shops are open again. Not that we actually live really close to any fabric shops, but when I get the time, possibly maybe in the summer holiday, to actually go somewhere with a few fabric shops and actually touch the fabric and feel the weight of the fabric and things, it'll be so much nicer. I mean, I absolutely appreciate online fabric shops and they have been brilliant over the past year, and I will always continue to order from them. Because of course there are lots of fabrics that you just know what they are and you know what they're going to be like. But this kind of thing, this was just, you know, a random viscose jersey, and it turns out it's just a little bit, you can see the stripes coming through the fabric. It's just a bit thinner than I was hoping it was going to be. So, but it will still be useful. I will make something out of that, no problem. Progress on the Maven pattern Somerset top from last week has been almost zero, but there were some really useful comments from you on the bottom of that video, so thank you to those who gave me some ideas. I've watched a couple of videos that got linked. I was going to try going back to size 12 at the top and grading out to the 14 at the bust and the waist, but then someone suggested the idea of using the front piece for the back as well. And I compared the neckline pieces, and the back neckline is quite considerably wider than the front, which I find slightly unusual. But anyway, that's what it is. So I think I might give that a go, and obviously I'll use the back armhole. So it will just be the neckline that I used for that, because actually the pieces are pretty much the same width front and back as well. So I think I'm going to give that a go. That will definitely be happening this week, and I will give you the progress on that next Friday. I mentioned last week that it was my birthday over the weekend. It was really nice. I had a lovely day just with the family, and that was really nice. And I had steered my husband towards a few sewing related gifts that I really wanted, that I'd spotted over the last couple of months. So I just thought I'd show you a couple of the things that I've got. So first of all is this stitch ripper from a company called Foxglove and Field. It comes in this really nice box. I think I spotted them on Instagram. The Stitch Sisters, I think, had done a little story about them on Instagram, and I was just absolutely taken. Look at that. Just love that. I just think it's so pretty, and it seems silly to sort of be so gooey over a stitch ripper, but you know, it's such a useful tool. Why not make it a really nice one? It's really nice weight, it's lovely, and so you just pull it out and there's your stitch ripper, and you pop that in there. It feels really nice in your hand actually, because it's so weighty. It's like writing with a really nice fountain pen. Now I believe that you can get replacement blades for this as well, and I'm not quite sure how that will work, because that looks like one piece, so I don't know whether you have to get a whole one of those. But I thought that was quite a nice idea, because obviously normally you've got a plastic thing and the whole thing just has to go in the bin, and they seem to blunt quite quickly. So I haven't done any sewing yet, so I haven't had to rip any stitches, but that, I just think it's lovely. The next thing I got was a Simflex expanding sewing gauge. Seen these online before, but because I have promised myself the challenge of tackling shirts as part of my Make 9 this year, I thought this would be super useful. So you use them to mark out buttonholes and things. Hopefully you get a nice even set of buttonholes. I haven't read the instructions, so I haven't sort of figured out what all, because there's lots of little markings on for measurements and stuff, so I haven't figured out exactly how those sort of line up and everything, but I'm hoping that that will come in really handy this year. I normally just fudge buttons. I don't normally even bother marking the buttons off patterns onto things, which is really bad, isn't it? So hopefully that will improve my button placement. And the last thing I got was this Prim turning set. As you can see, I haven't even opened it yet. Who did I see? Tamlin from Sewn on the Tyne was talking about this, I think on Instagram, and I asked her, you know, what were they really worth it? And she said, yes, absolutely, they are brilliant. I have had a couple of issues when I've been turning through ties, especially when you're making that waist ties for dresses, and they're so narrow. Sometimes trying to turn them through, even with the kind of sewn in ribbon method, can be a complete nightmare. So I will let you know how I get on when I use it. I have got a few patterns I'm hoping to do this year, again, that have got sort of long waist ties in, so they should come in pretty handy. And the last thing I've got to talk to you about today is a webinar that I attended last night. Some of you may have been there online as well. It was being run by Elisalex from By Hand London, and it was all about gathering. And look, it was so interesting that I wrote notes. Who would have thought that a webinar about gathering could last for 2 hours and could be so interesting? And it was one of those things where had a really long day, and at the end of that 2 hours, I was feeling so elated and excited again about sewing. Anyway, I thought that I would share with you, for those of you that couldn't attend that webinar, some of the sort of key points that I took away from it. They did record it, and it was available to watch for anyone who'd already sort of signed up to it. But the impression I got was that they weren't sure if or when they would release it for the general public to view that webinar. So in case it doesn't go live and you just want the basic roundup of the most important points, I thought I would give them to you here. Now, one of the biggest, not revelations, I suppose, but interesting points that I took from this webinar was that when you're doing your gathering, you should actually be doing your 2 rows of stitches either side of the seam line. I've done a little piece of scrap fabric for you just so I could show you what I was talking about. So imagine these are your 2 rows of basting stitches. You're going to be joining this piece when it's gathered up to whatever else you're joining it to by sewing your seam line in the middle of those 2 rows of stitches. And so if you're doing a triple row of basting stitch, you do 2 rows within the seam allowance and 1 outside the seam allowance. And if you're doing 2, so her example was for a 5/8 seam allowance, which is quite standard on woven fabrics, was to do 1 line of basting stitches at 3/8 in from the edge and another at about 7/8. So you just straddle either side of that seam line. And the reason for doing that is because when you've gathered in your stitches, you can then get really nice parallel gathers between the 2 sets of stitches. Whereas if you gather it all up and then stitch underneath it as your seam line, your stitches will be a lot more winky wonky. I'll gather this up to show you sort of what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've not done an absolutely perfect job of that, and this is cotton, so it's not it's not drapey and like a viscose would be, but as you can see, once you've gathered up and you've got these 2 lines of stitches, if you stitch, really hope you can see that okay, if you stitch through the middle of those 2 lines, you're going to get a much nicer looking gather, a much more controlled gather that's nice and parallel than if you're trying to attach underneath these 2 lines as your seam line. You can see you're going to start getting some almost like pleats and folds rather than that really, really nice gather. I think a lot of patterns tell you to gather within the seam allowance. So that was a bit of a revelation for me, that moment. What I would say about that is that you need to test very carefully on a piece of scrap fabric your needle, because obviously once you've stitched that together with whatever it's being stitched to, you're going to have a line of basting stitches that you're going to have to remove because they're going to be on the right side of the garment. So you need to know that whatever needle you're using is not going to puncture and break the threads of the fabric. Most fabrics, as long as you get the right needle, you should be able to just sort of tease any what look like holes out of the fabric, and because the needle should hopefully be pushing between the threads rather than breaking the threads. On the subject of thread, use a good quality thread. That was another really important point. Gutermann thread obviously is the one that I use, that my machine likes a lot. Elisalex also mentioned Madeira thread, which I'm not sure if I've actually heard of, but I'm sure a quick Google will throw it up. That is because if you've got a thread that is not good quality, it starts to pill as it sews and you're in danger of it breaking when you come to gathering your fabric on it. The next important point that was brought up from last night was that you should use the bobbin threads to gather with. So obviously when you're gathering, you're only using the threads on one side of the fabric. And Elisalex said the bobbin threads are the ones to use, and that is because of the way that the stitch is formed by the machine. Your bobbin threads will have a much smoother action when you gather them, I assume, because they're not knotted, whereas the top threads probably are knotted. So the fabric will glide much better and you'll find your gathering a lot easier. So with that in mind, everyone was very excited because someone asked a question about something about that, and everyone got very excited because Elisalex realised that she hadn't even thought about this, was that when you are sewing in your basting stitches to gather, you should place the fabric right side down so that your bobbin threads are going to be on the right side of the fabric. And that is because when you've gathered, the actual gathers are much nicer on the side that your bobbin thread is than the top thread. I don't know if you can see that, but the gathers they just fall more nicely. And that is because once you've gathered in using those bobbin threads, the bobbin threads are taut, whereas the top threads are, as you can see, look, they're following the gathers of the fabric, so they're loose now because you've used the bobbin threads to gather. So the gathers that are formed are much nicer on that bobbin side. So you want that to be the right side that you have your bobbin threads on, because that's going to be the side, once you've stitched your other piece too, that's where you're going to see those gathers. So if you've sewn it with the bobbin threads on the wrong side, the gathers will be much nicer on the wrong side of the fabric than the right side. So always sew your gathering basting stitches for gathering with the fabric right side down on your machine, and gather it using those bobbin threads which will then be on the right side of the fabric. So exciting when you realise simple things like that are going to make a massive difference to the look of your garment in the end. The other really important thing that Elisalex wanted to say was that when it comes to doing the actual gathering, just take your time. So measure the distance of whatever it is that you're gathering onto. So if it's a bodice or a waistband, you know what the total width is going to be and what you've got to get your fabric gathered down to. Get it to that. Don't worry about the gathers and how they're falling at that stage, but just get it to that size. Tie off your threads so it's not going to move. The width isn't then going to change. And then at that stage, you can slowly tease out your gathers, get them distributed how you want them to be, knowing that none of the gathers are going to fall out at the end because you've tied the ends in and you've got your width. And hopefully those tips should give you some slightly happier looking gathers. Another point she said was to sew with your gathers down to the feed dogs and your flat fabric on the top. If you've got your gathers on the top, your foot is kind of smushing the fabric through and pulling it slightly, and it will be changing how you've arranged your beautiful gathers. Whereas if it's on the bottom, the feed dogs will pick it up, pull it across, let it go, move and pull it across the next bit. So hopefully your gathers will be much more like you've set them in by hand if you put that gathered fabric down towards the feed dogs. It's not something that I have done previously because I find that quite scary because I can't see what's going on. But I have my beautiful new seam ripper now, so maybe I will be brave enough to put those gathers down towards the feed dogs. I'm definitely going to give that a go next time I do my gathering. So I'm sorry there wasn't any actual sewing to show you this week. It's just been a crawl to the finish line with the homeschooling this week, definitely. So I just haven't had the energy in the evenings to sit down and sew. But I'm definitely going to get onto some sewing next week, so I will have some things to show you next Friday. I hope you enjoyed seeing my little birthday treats that I got and my new fabric, and that you found the stuff about the gathering webinar interesting. By Hand London and Elisalex are definitely planning to do some more webinars, so keep an eye out on their Facebook page and their Instagram page. And also, if there's something specific that you think you would like them to try and cover, it's definitely worth popping them a message and saying, I heard you're doing webinars, because Elisalex is brilliant. I did the bodice fitting masterclass with her towards the end of last year, and her depth of knowledge is just amazing. So yeah, I would really recommend keeping an eye out for further webinars from them. Please do give this video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave me a comment. Let me know what you are going to be sewing this weekend and on to next Friday, and also if you're doing any gathering, whether any of those things that I mentioned are new to you, going to be useful info, and whether you will be able to use those to help you with any gathering that you're going to be doing soon. Thanks so much for joining me today. Hopefully I will be back next Friday with some garments to show you, but until then, have a good week and thanks so much for watching. Bye!